Well, Michael Cohen was on the witness stand for 4.5 hours today. He was as steady and calm and unfailingly polite as he has been throughout his testimony, to virtually everyone's surprise. The politeness seems genuine. He says, yes, sir, in his answers to Donald Trump's lawyers' cross-examination questions. There was even a moment where the politeness went both ways between Donald Trump's lead criminal defense lawyer, Todd Blanche, and Michael Cohen, after Michael Cohen gave Todd Blanche a detailed explanation of the New York City taxi business, including the regulations of the Taxi and Limousine Commission back when Michael Cohen owned very valuable taxi licenses. Todd Blanche said, quote, "Understood. Thank you." To which Michael Cohen said, "You're welcome." And they both seemed to mean it, which brought at least hints of smiles to the faces of some of the jurors at just how polite the politeness could be. Todd Blanche smartly went out of order in his questioning of Michael Cohen, out of sequence. Assistant District Attorney Susan Huffinger, who did the direct examination of Michael Cohen, took him through the chronological story of his life before Donald Trump, and then his life with Donald Trump, ending with his life of crime with Donald Trump, and his guilty pleas, and his admissions of perjury. And in that chronological flow over 11 years of Michael Cohen's life, his story of lying for Donald Trump to protect Donald Trump made sense in his role as Donald Trump's personal lawyer fixer. That lying for Donald Trump is what got Michael Cohen indicted. But when you take Michael Cohen's lying out of order, as Todd Blanche did, it's a much messier story and much harder to follow. And the incentives for the lying are deliberately left out in the flow of questioning that Todd Blanche chose. The problem for Todd Blanche during at least 4 hours of the questioning today is that it was covering ground already covered by the district attorney. And so every lie that Todd Blanche was underlining to the jury had already been revealed to them in the district attorney's direct questioning of Michael Cohen. But about 5 minutes of that questioning, maybe as much as 10, by Todd Blanche, right before the lunch break today, paid off in the way that every criminal defense lawyer is hoping cross-examination questions can pay off. Todd Blanche pointed Michael Cohen to a phone call log that the district attorney used to identify a phone call between Michael Cohen's phone and Donald Trump's bodyguard, Keith Schiller's phone. Here's how that testimony went on Monday with Assistant District Attorney Susan Huffinger about that phone call. Question: let's take a look at the call between Mr. Schiller and Mr. Cohen on October 24th at 8:02 p.m. Do you see that call? Answer: yes, ma'am. Question: and was it 8:02 p.m.? Answer: yes. Question: you called Mr. Schiller or did he call you? Answer: I called Mr. Schiller. Question: do you know why you were reaching out to Mr. Schiller in the evening of October 24th, 2016? Yes. Question: why? Because I needed to speak to Mr. Trump, and I knew that Keith Schiller was with him. Question: why did you need to speak with Mr. Trump at that point in the evening of October 24th? Answer: to discuss the Stormy Daniels matter and the resolution of it. Question: and did you have an understanding about whether during that conversation you resolved that you were moving forward to fund the deal? Answer: yes. That was then on direct examination. Today, Todd Blanche revealed some texts by Michael Cohen about an hour before his call to Keith Schiller's phone. Those texts were to and from a phone number that had been making harassing phone calls to Michael Cohen, and the person sending those texts eventually apologized to Michael Cohen and claimed to be 14 years old. Today, question: do you recall at 7:48 texting Keith Schiller about this 14-year-old? Do you recall that? Do you recall that? Answer: I don't recall. Question: do you recall texting Keith Schiller at 7:48? Who can I speak to regarding harassing calls to myself and office? The dope forgot to block his call on one of them. You don't recall that? Answer: it sounds right. Yes, sir. Question, do you recall at 8:02 your initial text to Mr. Schiller is at 7:48, and then at 8:02 he says, call me to you, right? Answer, yes, sir. Question, when you testified on Tuesday that you had a specific recollection of that 1 minute, 36-second phone call on October 24th, was not with Keith Schiller that you called Keith Schiller and he passed the phone to President Trump. You finalized the deal with Stormy Daniels and you said, we're going to move forward. And he said, yes, because you kept him informed all the time. That was your testimony, right? Answer, that's correct. Question, that was a lie. You were actually talking to Mr. Schiller about the fact that you were getting harassing phone calls from a 14-year-old, correct? Answer, part of it was the 14-year-old, but I know that Keith was with Mr. Trump at the time, and there was more than potentially just this. That's what I recall based on the documents that I reviewed. Question, that's not what you testified to on Tuesday. You said you had a recollection of a phone call on October 24th at 8:02 p.m. where you called Mr. Schiller and he gave the phone to President Trump and you told President Trump about the updates that you were moving forward with the funding. And he said, OK, go. That was a lie. You did not talk to President Trump on that night. You talked to Keith Schiller about what we just went through. You can admit it. Answer, no, sir, I can't. I am not certain that is accurate. Question, you were certain it was accurate on Tuesday when you were under oath and testifying. You were certain it was accurate. You had a phone call to President Trump. But now you are saying you are not certain it was accurate. Answer, based upon the records that I was able to review in light of everything that was going on, I believe I also spoke to Mr. President Trump and told him everything regarding the Stormy Daniels matter was being worked on and it's going to be resolved. Question, we are not asking for your belief. This jury doesn't want to hear what you think happened. Ms. Hoffinger, objection, the court sustained. Michael Cohen adjusted his testimony to say that he probably first said something to Keith Schiller about the harassing 14-year-old before talking to Donald Trump to get his approval for the Stormy Daniels deal. Michael Cohen said, I always ran everything by the boss immediately. And then it was time for the lunch break. Todd Blanche handled those few minutes of cross-examination very effectively. Very effective in the courtroom. But that phone call at 8:02 p.m. is not the only part of Michael Cohen's testimony that delivers Donald Trump's approval of the Stormy Daniels deal. Earlier in October of 2016, Donald Trump said, just pay it, just do it, according to Michael Cohen's testimony to the district attorney on Monday. Here is that testimony from Monday. Question, what, if any, additional pressure did you feel to close this deal with Stormy Daniels as a result? Answer, well, because the Daily Mail was in play and they were anxious to sell the story. Question, did there come a time after that, again, still in October of 2016, that Mr. Trump, in substance, expressed to you that he understood he could no longer delay this transaction? Answer, yes. Question, and describe that conversation that you had with him. Answer, he stated to me that he had spoken to some friends, some individuals, very smart people, and that it's $130,000. You're like a billionaire. Just pay it. There is no reason to keep this thing out there, so do it. And he expressed to me, just do it. Go meet with Alan Weisselberg and figure this whole thing out. Question, following that conversation with Mr. Trump, did you, in fact, have some discussions with Alan Weisselberg about trying to figure out how the payment would be made? Answer, yes. Todd Blanche has not asked a single question about Michael Cohen's discussions with Alan Weisselberg to arrange payment of the Stormy Daniels hush money. Todd Blanche told the judge today that he will use about 2 hours to finish his questioning of Michael Cohen on Monday, and Todd Blanche will surely then try to create reasonable doubt about that meeting that Michael Cohen described with Alan Weisselberg, where Alan Weisselberg hand wrote the payoff plan on the left side of that bank statement of Michael Cohen's that showed Michael Cohen's $130,000 payoff to Stormy Daniels. Todd Blanche is going to have to come up with an alternative explanation for the $130,000 written in Alan Weisselberg's own handwriting on that document, a document which Michael Cohen says they then brought into Donald Trump's office and discussed with Donald Trump. That very document that we just had up on the screen, the three of them in the room looking at that document. Donald Trump, Alan Weisselberg, Michael Cohen. In this trial, Michael Cohen will be the only person who was in that room who will offer under oath testimony about what happened in that room. The defense has already indicated there is no plan for them to call Alan Weisselberg to the witness stand, who could conceivably testify on behalf of Donald Trump and maybe say that that meeting never took place. That testimony is not going to happen. The defense has all but admitted to the judge that Donald Trump will not testify. And so the jury is going to be instructed that the lawyers' questions are not evidence. Testimony by witnesses is evidence that the jury can accept or reject. But questions by lawyers are not evidence. Questions by lawyers prove nothing. And so Todd Blanche's big moment today, where he raised his voice to the loudest level we have heard in that very polite courtroom from anyone in that room, saying to Michael Cohen, that is a lie, is not evidence in this trial. The jury will be instructed to that effect. The only actual evidence we have in this trial about that 8:02 p.m. phone call is what Michael Cohen has said about that phone call. Donald Trump's lawyers could call Donald Trump's bodyguard, Keith Schiller, to testify under oath about that phone call, but they have indicated that they will not call Keith Schiller. And so a loud and jarring and rhetorically very effective question was asked by Todd Blanche right before the lunch break today, but it is not evidence. There were other moments that Todd Blanche had today that are, to put it mildly, perplexing. Todd Blanche said something to Michael Cohen about Karen McDougal that undermines one of the pillars of the defense. Karen McDougal was the Playboy model who had a long-term affair with Donald Trump, and her story was then suppressed by the National Enquirer on behalf of Donald Trump during the presidential campaign, when the National Enquirer paid Karen McDougal $150,000 for her life rights so that the National Enquirer could then kill that story, prevent it from ever coming out. Todd Blanche actually said to Michael Cohen that Donald Trump, quote, didn't think this story would hurt him. But what about the Melania defense? The defense position is that whatever Donald Trump ever did in relation to the Karen McDougal story or the Stormy Daniels story was all about protecting the feelings of his wife, not protecting his presidential campaign. But Todd Blanche said in court today that Donald Trump didn't think the Karen McDougal story would hurt him. Why? Because Melania wouldn't care? Because Melania knows that this is what her husband is up to all the time? And at 3:43 p.m. today, just before the end of Michael Cohen's testimony for the day, Todd Blanche said to Michael Cohen, quote, President Trump reimbursed you from his own personal funds. Answer, either from President Trump's own personal funds or from the trust. So, Todd Blanche admitted in that question today that Donald Trump reimbursed Michael Cohen. The reimbursement has already been proved beyond a reasonable doubt in another case. In a civil case in California, Donald Trump actually admitted that he reimbursed Michael Cohen the $130,000 for Michael Cohen's payment to Stormy Daniels. That is a settled legal fact. But Todd Blanche doesn't seem to think so, because in his opening statement to the jury, Todd Blanche said, you're going to learn that this was not a payback. The $35,000 a month was not a payback to Mr. Cohen for the money that he gave to Ms. Daniels. Todd Blanche has not proved that. Todd Blanche has not asked a single question about the money Michael Cohen received, for which Michael Cohen says he did absolutely no work, and that it was indeed payback, for which Michael Cohen has provided Alan Weisselberg's handwritten notes calculating the payback. So the essence of the charges in this case have not been touched by Todd Blanche's cross-examination yet. This is a case of falsification of 34 business records, which were falsified as part of a conspiracy to illegally affect an election. Donald Trump's handwriting is on 11 of those false business records, the 11 checks made out to Michael Cohen. There is nothing in cross-examination that is going to get Donald Trump's signature off of those checks. 12 other falsified business records, according to the indictment, are ledger entries in the Trump bookkeeping system. No, Donald Trump did not personally make those ledger entries in the bookkeeping system. The bookkeepers who made those ledger entries have testified about how they made those ledger entries. But the law that Donald Trump is accused of violating makes it a crime to falsify or cause to be falsified any New York business record. And the other 11 falsified business records in the indictment are Michael Cohen's invoices that Michael Cohen sent to the Trump Organization to effectuate his reimbursement. How did Michael Cohen's invoices that he created become Donald Trump falsified business records? Because the Trump Organization, foolishly, as a legal matter, requested those invoices from Michael Cohen, who had no expectation or intention to have to provide invoices for his reimbursement. But after a Trump financial official requested invoices from Michael Cohen sent those invoices, and what made them falsified business records of Donald Trump's is that those invoices were then attached to other falsified business records in each one of those payments. Those 34 falsified business records, according to the district attorney, are the crimes that are charged in this case. And Todd Blanche has yet to say a single word about a single business record that the district attorney says is falsified. And so the stories of withering cross-examination of Michael Cohen today are, if you know anything about what the word withering actually means, not true. It was an excellent cross-examination for about 5 to 10 minutes, just excellent. And then it was another 4 hours and 20 minutes where Michael Cohen continued to hold his own in his way in a case that is not so much about Michael Cohen as it is about 34 pieces of paper that no one on the defense team has had much to say about. And as it stands now, the only actual evidence before this jury about how those 34 pieces of paper that the district attorney calls falsified records got created is that Donald Trump said, just do it. The other big defense strategy that I think can be effective here is just confusion. Can we just create enough confusion here in the jury so that you can't feel your confidence beyond a reasonable doubt because there's just so much confusion here?
Well, if you mix up October 24th with October 26th, that's one easy way. You know, how many jurors are paying that close attention? I think they will with closing arguments, but you know, that's one way that you focus on that phone call, and that was a hit. You know, they really dinged Cohen on that, at least as, you know, as Andrew mentioned, raising that reasonable doubt as to that phone call.
But that's a standard defense strategy.
Yeah,
is chaos and confusion, and also to have so much chaos that you need to have an extremely organized summation and so that you lay so many traps, so many things that need to be addressed that you sort of really make it difficult for the prosecution to have a coherent story that they can tell on their own. But I don't think Josh Steinglass, first, I don't think it's that complicated a case. And I also feel like, you know, Josh Steinglass is such a pro. I mean, I think he knows what he has to do.
How strategic do you think it was that Todd was jumping all over the place? Because my own personal view is that it was less strategic than it was accidental. Like, I don't think it was all that, like the timeline jumping, I thought he had some checklists and he was going down them and they were thematic, but I'm not sure that he was deliberately mixing up the narrative or the chronology in a way designed to disorient the jurors, even though that was the impact at times.
I mean, that could be right. I do think at times it was deliberate, and it does destabilize the witness,
yeah.
because you can get the witness being confused. And I actually thought one of the things that was great was, like, a lot of times somebody like Mike Cohen would be like showing like, I know everything and I'm going to be, and instead he was really good at saying, can you ask that again? Or like, what are you saying? And I have to remember, as he was doing that, I was like, I had the exact same question. I was like, I do not understand your question. So that's when he jumps, I think it's just sort of have him not be able to understand the context and have to answer out of context. Yeah. I agree with you that it may not all be strategic.
Well, one thing where I think he was definitely strategic is how the morning session before lunch ended. There was but the way that he elicited the sustained objection, and then after sustained is the last word, I think this is a good time for him. It was his suggestion for the lunch break at that time.
This version of Michael Cohen is so extraordinarily better than any version of Michael Cohen we've ever seen. And I started to wonder today, imagine if this was the Michael Cohen who showed up for the congressional testimony for every previous situation.
Can I fight back with you a little bit on that? I'll push back. So his tone was really different, but he's still substantively, in some respects, a mirror image of Donald Trump. This is a person who still has a lot of difficulty taking responsibility. He doesn't like being emasculated. The idea that he is not at the top of the heap is offensive to him. So, for example, the amount of fighting back he did about the fact that at some point he wanted a White House job was unnecessary. He may have done it tonally in a way that was much more acceptable to ears, but like he shouldn't have thought that much on that.
Yeah, I agree completely. He's ridiculous. I'm just saying, it's the best version of this ridiculous character. There's a very, very strong chance that this testimony's over on Monday. Very likely at this point.
Very likely. The question for me about Monday is only how many hours are left for a charging conference, and do they get to begin summations on Tuesday morning?
Right.
You don't think
didn't the judge want to have summations on Tuesday?
Tuesday? Yes.
Yeah.
And then he wants it to be all day, like, it's going to begin and end on Tuesday.
But he also said that he doesn't want summations and the charge to be separated from each other in terms of giving it to the jury. He didn't want the jury to have a break before the charge.
So you don't think the question is whether there's going to be a defense case? You don't think it's going to happen?
I think it is an open question formally designed to keep the prosecutors working over the weekend and people like us guessing and talking. And on Sunday night, we'll get some sort of unreportable or off-the-record indication.
I agree.
Right.
I don't even think they end up offering.
So, I started to wonder today, has the podcast, in its perverse way, made Michael Cohen a better witness? Because Crazy Cohen is on the podcast. Profane and screaming.
He gets it out.
And I hate Donald Trump and I want him in jail, like all that stuff that he does. And he's out of the system, and he comes in and sits in the witness stand, and he's presentable.
I have a different view. I think that with the sort of crucible of the trial and sitting down with prosecutors and I think probably a team of defense lawyers, and sort of having to sort of practice what cross would be, which, by the way, there's nothing wrong with it. It happens. Every single witness goes through that. Every single witness you see on the prosecution or the defense side, that happens. I just think that sort of forces discipline. And I think people told him, you lose your temper, they win. So, like, if you are sitting there and trying to, you're trying to say, like, your ego is you want to prevail, you want to be viewed as successful, you want to be viewed as a truth teller, don't blow up. So I think that was sort of stressed to him. So I think it sort of forced what I think is a sort of somebody who is not used to discipline having to sort of be really disciplined. And it's I think, and it's really remarkable. I mean, he is doing really well. I thought when they talked about his wife and his daughter, I thought he was going to lose it. And I could imagine being on the stand losing it, especially the one about the daughter, which seemed so unfair. And he was really good on it.
Right. And Lisa mentioned when our conversation in the car, I mean, he was very different temperamentally in the civil fraud trial. Like Lisa pointed out, he objected to questions by Alina Habba and said, and it was just stuff like that. And there was like none of that. There was one point in the trial where he was asked by Blanche and the judge to respond only to the questions and not digress. That happened like a million times during the civil fraud trial.
What did you make of? But when they played the podcast, I was struck at the one. He didn't really sound like himself. I mean, I almost thought they changed.
They burst the volume at first, and then it came down a little.
Yeah. So that I think,
sped up.
but I actually thought that was like one of the smarter moves because he wasn't really landing anything else, and I thought that's useful because it showed a really different side of him.
Yeah.
If you're the jurors and you're listening to that, are you thinking the guy before me is not the real Michael Cohen and this is all a sham and the real Michael Cohen is the recorded voice I just heard? Because they've heard other recordings of him too.